Selamat pagi and good morning. Welcome to the Yayasan Khazanah ILMU Circle of 2025. I'm Shvinita, your master of ceremony. Today's ILMU Circle brings together panelists, scholars, alumni, partners, and friends together to explore leadership, strategy, and global impact. How Malaysian talent abroad can come together and bring their global experiences to translate it into meaningful impact back at home. It's a pleasure to host you at the Consulate General of Malaysia in Los Angeles. And to our online guests, thank you for joining. So to open our program, I invite Cik Hidayah Asla, Head of Scholarship, Yayasan Khazanah, to deliver the welcoming remarks. Cik Hidayah, silakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning, everyone. Honorable Madam Anil Fariza Adenai, Consul General of Malaysia in Los Angeles, Encik Sharizal Sufian, Executive Director, Strategic Human Capital Management, Khazanah National Berhad, Mr. Hai Tiet, Senior Manager, United Nations Global Compact, Team Education Malaysia, Los Angeles, scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Cik Hidayah, Head of Scholarship of Yayasan Khazanah. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to the ILMU Circle 2025 here in Los Angeles. On behalf of Yayasan Khazanah, we would like to extend our warm appreciations to the Consul General of Malaysia for hosting us and to all our distinguished speakers, scholars, and invited guests for joining us today. This year's theme, Global Leadership and Malaysia's Role in the Changing World, is both timely and deeply relevant. We live in a world that is rapidly evolving, shaped by technological shifts, environmental challenges, and changing global dynamics. In such a context, Malaysia's ability to engage with the world depends greatly on the caliber, vision, and values of its leaders, including all of you here today. As Khazanah scholars, you are not just recipients of an opportunity, but custodians of trust, entrusted to learn, to lead, and to give back. Whether you are in corporate, academia, business, policy, or social impact, the experiences and knowledge you gain abroad must eventually serve a larger purpose: to uplift communities, strengthen institutions, and contribute to Malaysia's progress in meaningful ways. So today's ILMU Circle is a space for reflections and exchange to engage with ideas of leadership, strategy, and impact from our distinguished panelists, Madam Anil Fariza Adenai, Encik Sharizal Sufian, and Mr. Hai. We are also proud to have one of our own, Shaman Raj from Stanford University, as the moderator for today's sessions. I encourage everyone to listen actively, share openly, and connect meaningfully. Leadership in today's world is not just about authority, it's about empathy, collaborations, and the courage to act with integrity even in uncertainty. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our Khazanah scholars here who are joining us today. This year, the ILMU Circle 2035 is also being live streamed, allowing our Khazanah scholars from other parts of the United States, the UK, Australia, China, and Malaysia, also the scholars from other sponsoring institutions to participate virtually. We are truly delighted to have this broader community of scholars joining us, making today's dialogue even more diverse and enriching. With that, thank you once again for being here. I look forward to an inspiring session and meaningful conversation ahead, inshallah. Thank you so much.
All right, so we'll now transition into our panel discussion. So guiding the conversation is our moderator, Shaman Raj. Please welcome to the stage. And please welcome our panelists, Encik Sharizal Muhammad Sufian, Executive Director of Khazanah National Berhad, Honorable Madam Anil Fariza Idris, Consul General of Malaysia in Los Angeles, and Mr. Hai Tiet, Senior Manager, PRME Partnerships and Global Impact. All right, Charlotte, over to you.
Well, I'll speak to the moderator's point of view.
Sorry. I think that's me. Doesn't help.
You're okay. So, and then it's not working, but it's fine. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you to the MC, and thank you so much to all our panelists for being here. And welcome, everyone, both virtually and physically. Please give all of yourselves a big round of applause. Well, yes. Formally, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Yayasan Khazanah 2025 ILMU Circle session. My name is Sharman, and I'll be a moderator for today's panel session. I'll start today's session by first introducing our esteemed panelists, after which they'll discuss some prepared questions before moving on to the general question and answer session, which will be open to all our participants, both physically and virtually. Firstly, we have the Honorable Madam Anil Fariza Idris, the Consul General of Malaysia in Los Angeles. Anil Fariza Adnan, the Consul General of Malaysia in Los Angeles, my apologies. She is a career diplomat with over 21 years of service in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with some of her overseas postings including serving as the Second Secretary and Counselor at the Embassy of Malaysia in Santiago, Chile, and later serving as Minister Counselor at the Embassy of Malaysia in Paris, France. She has also made history by being the first female Malaysian Consul General in the North America region. Please give her a big round of applause. It is likewise my pleasure to also introduce Mr. Shahrizal Muhammad Sufyan, the Executive Director and Head of Strategic Human Capital Management at Khazanah National Berhad. Before joining KNB, he held senior leadership roles in Deloitte Southeast Asia, where he served as a partner specializing in HR transformation and strategic talent management in Korn Ferry, the Hay Group, Petronas, and IBM. His career has also included driving large-scale projects in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, with a strong focus on building leadership pipelines and strengthening talent ecosystems with the public sector. Last but certainly not least, we also have with us today Mr. Hai Kiet, a senior manager focusing on development at the United Nations Global Compact. He has over 15 years of experience in international development and multilateral cooperation, having served with UNESCO in shaping programs that aim to advance global education, cultural exchange, and sustainable development. All three panelists are alumni of American institutions of higher learning, with Madam CG being an alumnus of Tulane University, Mr. Shahrizal being an alumnus of the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma, and Mr. Haitek being an alumnus of Columbia University and Harvard University. Thank you to all the panelists once again for agreeing to spend your time to share your insights with us on this panel here today. Without any further ado, let's dive straight into the questions. First, perhaps a question directed at all three panelists. How do you see Malaysia's role evolving in the global landscape, especially in the United States?
Oh. Thank you. I always have the pleasure of being the first one, as being the only lady. Okay. I believe that our presence in the global landscape is growing. We can see, especially under the current administration of the PMX, we are the pioneer of some regional organizations. We are the chair of the ASEAN this year. Next week, we'll be hosting the ASEAN Summit, whereby we'll be welcoming President Trump and some other leaders to Malaysia. So, yay! So that shows the presence of Malaysia in the global landscape, whereby people listen to what we have to say. So if you ask me, that's good. In particular in the US, I also feel that our presence here is growing. However, there are some challenges as well as opportunities. as in other countries. But I think I would dwell into that a little bit later. So I give the opportunity to the rest of our speakers to say something, and then maybe we can have like a further discussion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo what Juan mentioned in the fact that over the last few years, I think the role of Malaysia as a connecting economy, as well as I guess partnering with both countries in the West and the East, has given us a very unique perspective. Again, for those of you who know what we do in Khazanah, there's quite a lot of interest that we actually have in terms of partnerships across. And I think that stems from the fact that we've always been very suited for investments given our landscape, the fact that we already have stability in government. And I think more importantly, the fact that we are the kind of moderating or the kind of economies that allow a lot of people to kind of like have interest in a small 30+ million or country as opposed to some of the others in the region. And I think part of that also has to do with the kind of footprints that we create in the respective countries. The fact that I think Malaysia has sent quite a number of students to the US. But that's the fact that we recognize the value of collaborations in the US, also in some other countries. But I think that also stems from the fact that there's a lot of potential investment opportunities both sides.
Thank you. I would echo what all the other panelists have been saying. And from the UN perspective, we're very happy to see that Malaysia is taking a very proactive step in terms of the international community and international development. As mentioned, I was very pleased to see that Malaysia took the chair of ASEAN this past year. That's something that we welcomed a lot. And also, given the current dynamics in the world right now, we see that Malaysia is really taking a step and being proactive in all the engagements. Within the UN, we see that Malaysia is leading in the discussions, education and culture and sustainable development, and also investments. Time again, I've seen many Malaysian companies around the world taking the proactive step and not following. They're leading the discussions. They want to see progress. They want to see investments. And so that's something that we see very positively on, and I'm very, very happy to see that in that regard.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful. Right. Moving on, perhaps now a question that's directed to Madam CG first. In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for Malaysia in building its presence in the United States? And how can the Malaysian diaspora contribute to that, specifically in terms of either students or career professionals? How can we contribute?
Thank you. I was just talking about the challenges and opportunities, right? So let's start with challenges first, just to be realistic. Okay. The first challenge I feel is the visibility. And we have to admit that Malaysia is not always at the top of the mind of Americans here. When you say about Asia, they usually visualize China, they visualize Japan. And thanks to K-pop culture, the increase of K-pop, they will think about Korea, K-beauty, BTS, Blackpink, those sorts. And they also think about Thailand because you see all these Thai restaurants mushrooming here in the US. They know Singapore because Singapore is becoming like the important financial hub in Asia, very similar to Shanghai, very similar to Hong Kong. Now there's the middle dot there in between of Thailand and Singapore that sometimes, especially the average Americans, they are not familiar with, and that's Malaysia. So visibility is a challenge for us here. And that is what we're doing here at the consulate. We want Malaysia, the average Americans, especially those who don't travel much, to know who we are, what we stand for, and what we have to offer. So that's the first challenge, visibility. Secondly, I think it would be the distance can be a factor as well because we're halfway across the world, and we cannot be anywhere everywhere. There's very limited of us. So we have to be very strategic in our approach in engaging with Americans, whether it's the people or companies and the investors that we want to engage with. And that's why we only have our embassy there in Washington, D.C., and we have a consulate in New York and the West Coast. We have the consulate for us here in California. When we say that we have to be strategic in terms that we know that in the West Coast, we have our focus is more on tourism. So we have Tourism Malaysia in Los Angeles, is just one block away from us. We have Madrid because California is actually the first state in the US that's our trading partner. And we used to have MIDA here, but then we moved to San Jose because that is where our investments are for. So we closed the office here back in 2017 to 2018, and then we opened it in San Jose. That's a strategic move that we have in mind. And we have the Education Malaysia here in Los Angeles, because we have Malaysian students, including all of you Khazanah scholars here in California, and we have to have this constant engagement with Malaysian students because we have one in Washington DC, but it's 5 hours flight from here. So again, to say that we have to be very strategic in our engagement with them. Opportunities, as mentioned, that economically, US is actually one of our major trading partners, top 3, and our major investor. So it's important for us to engage with them, and we still see many rooms for improvements, especially in the digital era, high tech, green economy. So those are what we are focusing in. And secondly, also to people connection. We feel that we know that the Malaysians are actually the best ambassadors here in the US. What you do, if you excel in your career, if you excel in studies, people will notice. People will see that, these Malaysians, we have people, top executives in MNCs in the US. So we're very proud to see, for example, a chief financial officer of Malaysian at AMD. We have a CEO Malaysian in Intel. So that is a very good reflection of Malaysians overseas. And that is the opportunity for us to show what Malaysia has to offer and how incredibly talented we are. So in the sense that, for me, I see that this is Malaysia would remain as a key factor. Malaysians diaspora is a key factor here in US, and I'm actually very confident and positive that we would have a good name of Malaysians here, and confident that they will fly the Malaysian flag high. So if you ask me what they can do, is that you can contribute in many ways here. Either you're doing here or back in Malaysia. Like I said, we have executives in Malaysia, here in MNCs. They stay here, but how they contribute is that they have projects between Malaysia and the US. We have Malaysians here who are famous bloggers in TikTok and all that, sharing Malaysian stories. So there are many ways on how Malaysian diaspora can contribute here in the US. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much. Moving on, perhaps a question now directed to Mr. Sharizal. Specific to Khazanah, how is Khazanah strengthening Malaysia's competitiveness in global markets, and what skills should young leaders, especially Khazanah scholars, cultivate to contribute meaningfully in various fields that may extend outside of Khazanah's core business focus?
So you're giving me the easy question. Okay. So I guess for those of you, who know about Khazanah, a lot of our investments are at the moment more towards the domestic Malaysian environments, because again, one of the mandates of the government is to be able to basically help develop the local economies. But we are often looking at rebalancing it against what the opportunities are as well in globally. So again, for those of you who know, we have offices in China, we have offices in India, Turkey, and in New York, right? And we're always on the lookout to be able to look at basically what would help basically propagate the contribution of investments back to the country. So on that particular note, when you're looking at the kind of talent that we're always looking for, all of you basically have answered the question because you're scholars of Khazanah, right? So that's one step of it. The thing that you probably would need to be able to look at as you are studying still is to be able to talk about what kind of networks can you bring when you go and enter the workforce. Some of you are freshmen, some of you are juniors. Whatever the case is, I will always tell you that I think the value is in the networks that you build. Now, a little bit of story. When I was in college, most of you weren't even born, right? That was how, long time ago, in not so much of a galaxy far away, but when I went to Texas, the student population of Malaysians there was 4, right? So when you basically want to talk about that, I had a hard time explaining to people I was Malaysia, and as one just talked about, I said, look, you know where Singapore is? I said, yep. You know where Thailand is? I said, yep. Okay, you know that stretch of land that basically looks in between those two? Yeah, that's us. Right? So, oh, okay. And again, in the 90s, people were still talking about Borneo. So, the argument has always been, so do you guys live on trees? And the argument that we all said, yeah, we just take the elevator up. But that was one of those things. But the one thing that I think you have more benefit now is the fact that social media technology gives you the ability to link across globally, even right now with all the colleagues inside, all the friends that you have online. So this is the opportunity for you to learn from each other as well as those who are interested in Malaysia, right? So again, very quickly, 2 weeks ago, Khazanah hosted the Megatrends Forum. I don't know whether some of you actually signed on, and we had professors from UC San Diego, right, who basically Professor Ulrike Schneider, who is basically there. And next year, we'll also have somebody from Stanford, Professor Michelle Galford, who's basically there, right? She does a lot of the graduate business school studies. Now, the reason why they're interested is because they understand that from a contextual standpoint, Malaysia is the center point where people look at as really culturally diverse. You talk about Singapore, it's financial. You talk about culture, you talk about Malaysia, because again, what do Malaysians do when you talk about Malaysia? Food. You don't talk about the economy, right? You talk to them about the food, because that's basically what we do. Right? I always tell them that the famous greeting for all Malaysians in Malaysia has always been not good morning, but have you eaten? Right? Now, it's a very interesting thing culturally, which I think as Malaysians, you need to own. Right? And the reason why I say that is because if you don't have that, then basically, as we talked about, as a small country of 30 plus million, what is it that you can bring that's unique? Right? And again, why Khazanah has actually placed ourselves strategically in the four locations, as well as building a lot of partnerships globally, is because we feel that we matter. Right? And it's not just because we matter because we're Khazanah, we're Malaysian. It's more because we are part of a global network. So I think that's something that I guess when you talk about what the students or what some of you coming into the workplace should be thinking about bringing in is basically, again, your own networks. Some of you are talking about, doing economics. Some of you are talking about, doing some of the data sciences, and we've heard quite a number of different kind of things. You bring your degree with you, But more importantly, when you come into Khazanah, which I expect most of you to do, right? We expect you to also bring in basically who you are from the time you spent here in the US. Okay, it's one of the main things because that on top of all the support that you get when you actually go into the various companies, including Khazanah, is what then enriches the entire environment, right? So think about that, think about the kind of networks, think about the kind of things that you bring other than just the value of your degrees. I mean, again, it's one thing to be able to have the degree, more importantly, is the kind of value that you bring as an individual into the employment space. Sorry, we long-winded.
Thank you so much. I think, wow, that was really insightful. Maybe just a follow-up question on that, but we'll open it to all three panelists. Ichi-chan spoke a lot about bringing your network into it and tapping into that to really extract value as one enters into the workspace when all of us go back to Malaysia eventually. But as professional development and networking become a larger and larger role of people's careers, and career development is no longer like confined to the spaces of just LinkedIn or just handing your resume or CV to someone, how can Malaysians, especially those studying in the US, ensure that their time here is not just a blip in their lives where, right, we are just getting this information and then we're just like taking it back home? How can we effectively take that network with us back home, insofar as we want to actually go back home and develop industries and sectors inside Malaysia, rather than, say, developing that network using other means that exist outside the country, like, for example, doing a startup here? Like, how can we bring the network back to Malaysia? Would anyone like to go first? Thank you.
First, I just wanted to extend my appreciation to Khazanah and the Consul General for hosting this and inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak on the panel as well as meet everyone. For those that may not be aware, I work at a UN entity called the UN Global Compact. So basically, we are the private sector arm of the UN. And so we work with over 20,000 businesses around the world. And so as you can imagine, it's about networking and talking to stakeholders to realize their ambition to support the UN's mandates to support the humanity and the planet. And what we always advocate is that we are here, the UN, please use us to help actualize all this impact that you're hoping to see. So in your work, you're here in the US, you're at these esteemed institutions, take that to your advantage. Don't be shy, do not be afraid. I always tell the startups that we advise, be ambitious. If you're not going to do it, somebody else is going to do it. The worst answer you can get is a no. So go to various networks, go to conferences, go to events like this, talk to people. Although I do support LinkedIn and whatnot, I always say person-to-person communication is very important and it has a lasting impact. So don't be afraid to go to this conference that you feel like perhaps you may not be welcomed at. Just go. The worst you get is a no. Go up to that person and say, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, Z. To be quite frank and honest, when I get approached by young people with such tenacity and ambition, it actually is a positive in my life. And I actually want to extend opportunities in that. And for those that are perhaps shy or may not pursue those opportunities, I don't know that they're there. So how do I extend that opportunity? So in my advice to all that you're here in the US at these esteemed institutions, have these opportunities to take advantage of them. Don't be afraid to hear a no, because the opportunity is there, and if you don't take it, amazing things can happen.
Okay. So, to echo what was just said, you have the opportunity to do things that other people may not be able to have from a value standpoint, right? Not just so much from the connections that you have, but more the access to some of the things that people will sort of kill for, right? Again, some of you in Stanford, some of you in Berkeley, that's basically the #1 and #2 ranked startup in the region, not the US, right? every other person that when I was in Stanford about a month ago, everybody, and I think was talking to them, everybody seems to want to start a startup, right? Everybody seems to think about having a startup. And I remember when I was in college, I just said, how do I get my GPA up so that GPA doesn't force me, doesn't kick me out of my scholarship, right? But you have other people inside that. Now, the reason why I say that is because even if you're not interested in doing a startup, talk to the people who are, because you'll be interested to find out basically what's happening in terms of interest in the markets, so that when you go back, you can always share with the prospective people in Malaysia about what's happening, right? Again, the connections that you have around some of these things, later on, whether you realize it or not, you can build. LinkedIn is not bad. LinkedIn is essentially people who feel shy, you want to connect because whatever it is, but then always follow up. Some of the things that I've had to do in HR over my last 31 years has always been, okay, as you said, kalau segan nak bertanya, then no one's going to know who you are. So I'll just, because of technology, you send a note, hi, just wanted to say hello, and eventually you build a relationship. It is a network economy that we're looking at right now, right? And because of that, you have an opportunity to link a lot of people, especially in the US, to the rest of the world. So it's not just about you representing Malaysia, it is also about the US understanding what the region, especially Malaysia, brings to people.
I hear what you say, and I cannot help myself by nodding my head. Like, yes, what you said is right. I cannot emphasize more the importance of having this network. But in order for you to have this network, you have to be brave, you have to be courageous. And then I have a motto in that. I'm going personal here. I have a motto in life. It's just do it. Whatever that you have in mind, just do it. Just giving a background that I did computer science back at school. It was nothing that I wanted to do, but it was something that I had to do to please my parents at that time. Whatever that you do, especially in academic years, is very much dictated by your parents. But you guys here have these great opportunities to do wonders even. Because when I meet these students, they are pursuing their education in something I never heard before, like microbiology or biochemical, these kind of things. So you have these opportunities, and then make use of them. Just do it, whatever that you have in mind. Be brave, be courageous. Because if you don't do it, then you would have in the back of your mind in 10 years to come, like, oh, what if I've done that? Maybe I should have done that and all that. So be courageous, establish network, because that is what, give you success, inshallah, in future. So thank you very much, panelists, for that very wonderful advice.
Yeah, thank you so much to all our three panelists. Right now, maybe a question directed to Mr. Haikiet. Right. How can ethical and values-driven leadership guide nations and organizations through global uncertainty? Now, I'm asking this because, in terms of global uncertainty, I think the times that we are currently in might be one of the more unprecedented periods of human history. So, especially given that, how do you think Malaysia as a country, from the perspective of the United Nations, can sort of leverage this and maybe make opportunities out of the crisis, especially as an upper middle income country?
Thank you for that question. I think I was focused on individual agencies within oneself and how that can impact that question. But first and foremost, I want to ask for a show of hands in the room, who is aware of what the Sustainable Development Goals are? Oh, great. That makes me very, very happy as a UN person that people are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. So for those that may not be aware, the Sustainable Development Goals were created in 2015 by the international community. there are a set of 17 very ambitious but needed goals. They range from protecting our oceans to eliminating poverty to extending education for all. And at this moment, given the discussion about the current dilemmas and challenges, only 17% of these goals are on track, and they're on target to be supposed to be achieved by 2030. That's a very stark challenge. And from most of the goals, they're actually stalling or they're actually regressing. So that's not something that is good for humanity and the planet. And I say this is because this is an opportunity for Malaysia to be proactive and perhaps be a leading voice in this light, because this requires a lot of ambition. And if I may highlight the dichotomy between ambition and impact, use a personal story. So many years ago, early in my career, when I was stationed with the UN in Afghanistan. And so one of the requirements of my work was to visit communities, to see what they thought of our work and to see what we could do better. And so I remember I visited this family at one instance. They were very happy to welcome me. It's not every day you get someone from the UN, I guess, to visit you and ask your opinion. And the family, they gave me really great food. They introduced me to the children. They showed me all their furniture. And I remember very vividly that there was a time during that visit that one of their children came up to me, very proud of himself, wanted to show me his toy. It was some type of wooden block. And right away, when the child was showing me the toy, the mother reprimanded him, and then the child ran away crying. Of course, I didn't follow up in that instance, but I asked my Afghan colleague a couple hours later what had happened. And so he said that the child was actually, it was a boy, male gender, was playing what was classified in Afghan culture as a female toy. And in my head, of course, I don't want to think of anything because each person comes from a culturally different background. But I was thinking in my head at the time that as a child, I think the child must have been only 6 or 7 years old. They may not know these dynamics of, the gender categories. And so I always think that as a young child, there's a full of energy, creativity, imagination that it's an impetus for creating impact in the world. And so this sat with me for quite a bit of time. And I decided, I think a couple months after, that I wanted to take a leave of absence from my post and work on this issue. What I deemed then was the right to play. And long story short, when I took the leave of absence, I decided to do a gender neutral toy company where there were no labels on any toys, and girls could play with then action figures or construction blocks, boys could play with whatever. Because I believe that as a young child, you have such imagination, creativity that can help move the needle in the world. And I guess in today's terminology, I'm very old, even though some may think that I look young. It went viral. We had a lot of customers from around the world, and I realized that I wasn't alone in this thought process of wanting to create a better environment for children to grow. We were in newspapers around the world, the media, and we got a lot of economic success. And I wanted to share this story because it takes ambition to move the needle in the world and not being afraid. And also, I wanted to tell the story because in some circles around the world, there are some people that believe that being successful is tied to economic prosperity. But I wanted to tell the story because I had this ambition to move the needle in the right to play, but also it was also an economic success. So creating impact in the world is not siloed from economic prosperity. It can be together. And so I tell this story again is it's about um, one's own agency and ambition to create impact in the world, but to not forget that creating impact in the world can also have impact with yourself in terms of economic prosperity as well. So I encourage everyone in the room that follow your passions. It will lead to many types of different successes. It may not see it now, but it will. So I didn't envision it at the moment because I just wanted to move the needle and the right to play. But so I was able to successfully exit in the company, but then now I am back at the UN. So
Sure. Thank you. That was so inspiring. Before we move on to the next question, I think the question originally was rather heavy and especially echoing the insights that Mr. Highcat gave. Would either one of you want to share some of your insights as well?
That was you.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
I thought you were asking for the microphone. I understood what to do. Happy.
No. We were just very engaged. I forgot the question. No, I think again, echoing what was talked about, make your mark, right? I think just you have to figure out what's unique about you. There is one thing about Asians that sometimes I feel that we underscore, and we always like to say that we're quietly confident, right? We're confident, but we like work hard, let this, not let everything, like let the GPA speak for itself, right? And sometimes the problem with that is when you're quietly confident, the ones that make slightly more noise get a bit more attention. And it's just very basic thing. But again, if you're hearing basically some of these things, what we're basically asking for you to do is to help become the eyes and ears for the future of the country. I think that's the important part, right? Because some of you are looking at an ambition that is probably not even there yet, just like what was talked about, right? You're talking about 15, 20 years ago, people graduate because they want to get a job. Now people are looking at they want to basically set up their own company. Some people want to do a lot of different things, but again, it's up to you guys to actually want to make that impact, whether it's economically, whether it's financially, whether it's socially. You have basically the means in the US to understand and learn, and then to take it back, right? And to kind of like bring that to the table. So I think that's where, again, I would safely say that if nothing else, bring the value of what you've experienced and what you learn, as I said earlier, around just what kind of person can you add value to the moment you land and you start saying that, okay, I'm not going to repay all of these things back, right? Because again, the country is really trying to make a difference. If you listen to the government about wanting to increase living wages, they're talking about, the Madani concept on some of these things, as well as being a global citizen that has an impact. All of that basically resides with the generations that are coming in. And that's basically all of you, right? I mean, we are closer to the other side of, of the workspace. I'm not saying for everybody. I mean, I've got like 5 more years before I retire, right? But again, for those of you who are coming in inside some of that, you probably have to understand that the baton isn't just here's a job. This is now actually here's a narrative that you have to write. Right? Anything good?
I mean, you guys said this very importantly and articulately. I just wanted to add, or maybe something echo, learn as much as possible while you are here. I even mentioned this to the ladies in Khazanah yesterday, that one like our students here in the US, particularly, sorry for the rest in online, some everywhere else in the world, but in the US, is that you get to be exposed of the culture, right? As mentioned, that it's not just the qualification, the degree that you obtain from the universities. Of course, that you need to satisfy your scholars, managers, and you have to excel in your studies. That's why you are here. But the opportunity to be here, to learn the culture, to learn the positive values, these are the ones that make you different than the rest of what you learn. So learn as much as possible, absorb as much as possible of what you know here, your friends, your network. Because I know some of you are doing internships either in Malaysia or here in the US. So make use of that. You know? As someone who is already across the borderline of the age, hopefully that we are much wiser now. So these are the ones that are very important because that actually builds your character. That makes you different than the rest. And that makes you more valuable to the companies and to the nation. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as another follow-up to that question, sorry, we are going a little bit tangential on this, but as we talk about, absorbing networks, absorbing values, I feel personally that one thing that's very commendable about the business culture perhaps in this country is that people here are not, perhaps have a lower fear of failure. And I feel like, especially in the startup scene, being in a school that is in the startup scene and being in the Bay Area region, I feel like that sort of value is very much essential to like people, especially Malaysians in the diaspora or back home who want to like, for example, do a startup or venture into a business sector that is a bit more risky and not as tried and tested. But then again, the Malaysian diaspora is only so large. Like Khazanah scholars in my batch are perhaps 30, and in the US it's maybe about 10, is it? About 10 around there. So as much as we can absorb these values, when we go back home, for instance, Malaysians are still quite kiasu, which is Hokkien for scared to fail, scared to lose. Sorry. And yeah, Malaysian society as a whole tends to penalize failure a lot more than perhaps, American society, especially if someone wants to try something new. So speaking more broadly, just across and outside from this room here, what can be done back home in Malaysia on a macro scale, in your opinions, to sort of shift the needle in this regard and to create a society that is a bit more open to new ideas, especially in the business world? Yes.
Thank you for that question, because at the UN Global Compact, we work with a lot of businesses around the world, and we work with governments and all stakeholders too. And time again, they keep on telling us that there's a skills mismatch. This is globally, but this is also in ASEAN. It's a big challenge in ASEAN right now. It's a skills gap where the education system, what is using, is not matching what they are in need. I think in our research, we found out that we surveyed a lot of leaders and CEOs and education stakeholders. 96% of academic leaders, when we're talking about deans, professors, thought they were preparing students for the world very well. But only, I think it was like 41% of students felt that was the case, and only 11% of CEOs felt that was the case. So there is a great mismatch in that light. And we delved a little bit deeper. We found out that because of the digital transformation, AI, the greening, and given the global dynamics at the moment, that we're in uncharted territory. Nothing in the textbook can help guide us into what we need to confront with humanity and the planet. And some of the key skills that I just want to highlight that Malaysia can really, really build upon is not just ambition, but the soft skills. Especially with AI, it's transforming every single industry. Some of these jobs may not exist in the future or in a matter of days. And so some of the skills that the private sector has mentioned is critical thinking, communication, the ability to do foresight and to be ambitious and to question everything. Because right now, everything is being questioned. And so it's not a time for being followers, just working in a company or institution, you just follow. And in the US, I think there's a saying that you just work for the paycheck. It's a time for leadership and help guide me, because every single sector right now is questioning, where do we go now? What can we do? And we need that ambition, that critical thinking to help guide the discussion boards greatly. And I think Malaysia can build upon this. We see a lot of potential in Malaysia right now.
How many of you have been to the US before you started your degrees? Anyone visited? So what? So there were statistics to say that again, when scholarships were given out, essentially to this point, less than 10% of people who actually applied to study overseas has been to the country itself, right? Now that speaks to, I guess, the question around whether or not we are kiasu about failing, right? Because you don't know other than what you think you know when you apply about the country you're going in. You would have done your necessary diligence. And it's the same thing, I suppose, whether or not you allow that fear to stop you or to spur you, right? Now, the reason why I say that is because, yes, the kiasuness of failing is something that I personally feel is more a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you're going to fail and you don't want people to fail, you're not even going to go there, right? And I think the reason why I think people buy into that is because we're afraid that people are going to see us as failures. Why the US doesn't necessarily say that, and even if you look at China, if you look at Jack Ma and some of the others, it's about failure is just a learning point to your next success, right? We need to start thinking about that, right? But again, one thing I will say about Malaysians, sometimes we get very hung up about getting like straight A's. Not to say that you shouldn't. Don't get me wrong. But you need to be able to recognize basically what is the value of really some of these things. Right? You go back to Malaysia, you're gonna fail. Anything that you do in any part of the world, whatever your first job is, trust me, you're gonna fail. Why? Because you don't know what you don't know. Okay, so get used to that. But use that to learn and learn fast. Right? I think again, when people talk about the kiasuness of Malaysia or Singapore, Singapore actually has a lot more startup than Malaysia. And I hate to say this publicly, but again, if you talk about kiasu, it basically started off as a Hokkien word, but it reflected a particular culture which, well, you know, we assigned to a particular country, which shall name nameless, right? We know who they are. But again, as I said, it's all up to whether or not how resilient you guys are and how much you really want to push, right? Do we need a lot more startups in the country? Yes, right? The investments are there, right? You just need to be able to say, okay, again, I want to try this out. If I don't just go down this path of despair, pick up, look for other people, move up. That's what the Americans or the West does very well because they know what not to do after that, right? We lament, fail, why. I mean, that's literally the Malaysian way, right? You basically dissect the failure. By the time you reach that, you're too tired to be able to do the next thing, right? So when they say again about the culture of startups is fail fast, recover fast, we can do the same thing, right? Again, we've been taught since young, from from a cultural standpoint, you fall down, you get up. Again, it's the same thing. Just don't buy into it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think some of us in Khazanah, as you get into it, it's yes, you're gonna fail, that's fine. But do it because you want to learn, not because you intentionally want to fail. Right? That's just sabotaging yourself. Right? So again, something to think about, because again, as I said, we do need people to go and progress. We need more entrepreneurs. We need people who look at new technology to be able to set up shops, even in, for example, in the US, but who are Malaysians. Again, as what Pon just talked about here, it is the pride of recognizing that we bring value globally is where we need to start having that kind of resilience and, I guess, courage to be able to do that. If not, you're going to end up in a 9-to-5 job. Somebody else is going to be doing that, and some of you may like that, but I don't think most of you came all the way just to get a 9-to-5, right?
I echo what you mentioned that you learn from your mistakes. I'm a mother of 4, so I always tell my kids that it's okay to make mistakes, but most importantly is that you admit your mistakes, you learn from your mistake, and not to do it anymore. And the culture of the kiasu, fear of failing, is something that we need to address in Malaysia, because if we have at the, like in the startups, and like you see the Microsoft companies, you see Facebook, they all failed before, and they've done it so many times before they gain success. So I think it's very timely that we change the perspective, we change the meaning of failure, that it's not the end of it, but it's also a start to something and hopefully, a success. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, perhaps going off that as well. I mean, I feel like the next question I have to add a little bit of context, and I feel like it relates a bit more to the participants here, because many Malaysians returning from the diaspora, from the US, other countries, China, the UK, are deeply passionate about contributing to a varied field of sectors, biotechnology, various fields of engineering, social impact fields, like for example, like impact investing or advocacy, rather than perhaps just the tried and tested, the beaten paths, such as finance or medicine or something like that. But a practical problem in Malaysia when we talk about bringing back talent is that as an upper middle income country, wages in these fields remain relatively low in Malaysia. And another thing is that people often lament that Malaysia is often at the lower stages of the added value chain. Like for example, in semiconductors, like Malaysia often focuses on the ATP aspect, the assembly, the testing, which is lower value compared to, for example, the fabrication of the chips themselves, which often take place elsewhere, Taiwan, for instance. But as a result, most Malaysians, especially scholars returning from overseas, might have this tendency, right? I've already done so much, I've already gone overseas. It would be a waste for me to be in an industry that doesn't pay me so well or something like that. So maybe I should just, bite the bullet, enter finance, bite the bullet, do something that's a bit more stable, quote unquote, stable. So as a result, in Malaysia, some social impact initiatives, other industries like biotech, like other up-and-coming fields, risk remaining underfunded and maybe losing valuable talent to other industries. But what do you think that the country as a whole can do for these students, these scholars, these Malaysians in addressing these issues, which I feel affect both sides of the coin? I feel like we already talked about one, but now this is the more individual human aspect of it.
So, as the employer of most of the Western scholars, I think that's where we're getting at, right? Okay. So let's put it this way. When we were looking at giving out scholarships, we do recognize the value of the various areas or fields of study. We're also aware that, again, there are some places, like you talked about biotechnology and some of the others, that the country hasn't necessarily invested a lot in, right? Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have it. It just means that it probably sits in a stage that requires the graduates that are in this room or in the session to be able to then contribute. So I'm going to answer your question, I guess, in a couple of parts very quickly, right? Everybody says Malaysia doesn't pay well. I think that's a fallacy. The reason for that is, if you compare, and I always say this, right? How much, if you go to Singapore, if you earn 1,000 Singapore dollars, it doesn't mean you earn 3,200 ringgit because you're in Singapore. So you pay whatever it is in the local currency for the kind of things. And if you talk to the Singaporeans, they are all trying to move to Johor because of the fact that it's very hard for them to sustain any kind of proper standard of living in Singapore because of the high cost, right? In Malaysia, again, the salaries are increasing, but the cost of living isn't accelerating as high as some of the others, right? So you need to think about that and balance that particular perspective. Because again, as a guy comes out, sometimes, I'm getting more if I basically work in the US. So fine, you have to pay state tax. right? So what's the state tax in LA? I mean, in California, 20 something, right? 20 what? Okay. So we don't have that. We basically just have whatever you pay as a salary. And then if nothing else, you have to pay your sales and service tax at 6%, right? You don't have state tax. So again, I will tell you, I guess it's all about basically what you do with the information you have, right? Trust me, if you join Khazanah, we won't treat you poorly, right? The salaries that you come into are actually, as your scholarship stipends are, quite decent, right? We won't make anybody go hungry, right? Unless you basically cannot stop eating, and that's a different story. Second thing is about the industries. Now, for those of you who are scholars, again, it is going to be a situation where we will try and work with all the various GLCs within the Khazanah companies to be able to build. And you know that we basically have, we've got basically a lot of need in, our various companies like IHH is basically, hospital and pharmaceuticals and services there. You've got engineering that we require. On the earlier statement about semiconductors, we've basically got a base cap that looks at really now going up the value chain, right? The association, or at least the National Semiconductor Strategy, talked about needing 60,000 engineers in 5 years, right? So it's basically around, as you say, as you come back in, it's also telling people about what kind of jobs that will suit you. Now, will that mean that everything will suit you immediately? Sometimes, as I said, it's really dependent on the industry you want to come in, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll end up in the same job. Again, I think when I was being introduced, I started off in different places and I'm in a different place. I started off as a treasurer in Maybank, right? So I started off as a treasurer and then I moved from treasury into HR. That's a longer story. But then I moved into consulting and I have moved into Petronas, back into consulting, and I've actually worked in 6 different countries, right? It's all about the timing and whether or not you still don't lose sight of what you want to do, right? So again, if you're talking about biomedicines, you're talking about, some people are talking about nuclear energy, or what was the degree I was talking to my mentee about. She was doing something around psychology and neuropsychology, and sorry, I forget, because it's just when I had to do my finance degree, when I was like, ya Allah, susah ni. Now people are taking things that I don't even. It's like, okay. Somebody was doing economics and psychology. It will happen for you. It's just that you need to be able to be around when it happens, right? I think that's one of the things that we'll tell everybody, right? Because some people say, oh, I can work and do more value here in the US. Yalah. But for as long as you're going to look for a job here, no disrespect, a lot of opportunities, it'll never happen back home, right? So you want to be the follower here or you want to be the creator there? That's basically the option that you have, right? So again, that's some of the things that as you get into your final year and you see me again, when we start talking about your jobs and, Yayasan, as we will also help on that, we will do as much as possible to show you what's available, right? We'll talk about it. But again, the country is, growing a lot to be able to talk about opportunities, even in startups. So we have Dana Impact. Dana Impact is basically one of our smaller venture companies that talk about SME development. And if people want to work for them, we basically got people who were scholars who basically said, I'm actually better because I want to do technology. And some of the startups that actually created said, okay, finish your bond there. And we've allowed that. For as long as people have the effort and they want to contribute, and we have the opportunity to do that, we'll do that, right? So that's basically my spiel for you guys still studying. So don't worry, we'll take care of you. When I talk about salaries, come see me separately. But I don't think anyone is suffering. Okay? So, I had to get validate with someone.
So I will talk about some of the macro trends that we're seeing from the UN, and this also includes Malaysia. And I'm coming from different perspectives. First and foremost, of course, when we see a country that's heavily focused on a particular industry or some of the talent is going to a particular industry, we talk to the country saying this is quite dangerous. We saw that during COVID when a country specific saw a lot of talent going to a specific sector because in the world of finance, they always say you need to diversify your portfolio. Same in an economy, you need to diversify where your talent is going, or that can be very, very dangerous, not just for the individual, but also for the country. Having said that, though, some of the trends that we're seeing, and my personal belief too, as well, is that it's not necessarily a negative thing at an individual level for talent to go to a certain industry first, because what we see that globally things are changing where talent is not necessarily staying in a specific sector, they're moving around a lot. So, for example, I think I spoke to some of your colleagues about the finance industry. It's very, very common in finance where they just work, they do their 2 years of investment banking, and then they leave and go into other ventures. And that's something that I think Malaysia could encourage because you gain valuable skill sets in investment banking, the tech world, government that can transfer to another industry. It's cross-industry learning. And the second point that I wanted to mention is that about the notion of ambition that we were talking about earlier. This is not idealistic of me to say because it happened to me. I see a lot with the young people that we work with is that if you have the ambition, it's just this mindset, subconscious, you will make it work. And everyone in this room, you guys are excel at your field, excel in your academics. I have no doubt that you will not quit. So the idea is, even though it may not be finance or it may not be tech, if it's an area that you're passionate about, say it's creating teddy bears or stuffed toys for Malaysia, it may not pay as much, but I trust you because of the caliber you're at, you will make it work. And that's how all the amazing startups of the world came to Spotify, Meta, Google. They didn't go in for the paycheck. They wanted to create impact. They wanted to create a product that would revolutionize the world. And then, boom, the money came in. And look, they are billionaires now. You're at a prime age because you're young. You can take these risks because you can, if worst comes to worst, you can always get a 9 to 5, as mentioned, later in life. But to have this opportunity, this knowledge, this network, these resources you have, and to help, bring Malaysia to the forefront is at your fingertips. So don't be afraid because a lot of these entrepreneurs of the world, it was scary for them, but they took the risk and look where they're at now. So I encourage, all of you to consider that ambition. It may seem scary, but the world is scary. Why not do it?
Thank you. We just listened from the perspective of the employer, and we listened to the perspective of the private. So I'm just going to share a little bit on perspective of the government. Now, the government, especially current administration, has been doing a lot of things, providing a lot of opportunities for the youngsters now. Now we have all this Dana Impact, all this, you name it, whatever Dana, whatever fund, to encourage young individuals or in a group to go and test and do ventures, do creative things, right? And I don't know, maybe 20 years ago when I was at their age, I don't think we had that much opportunities. So I think, and I agree that it's the matter of the mindset, whether you want to grab the opportunity or not, because it's all in front of you. It's just a matter whether you want to do it or not, and whether you are ready as well as be brave in navigating into something that is unknown territory, and also be ready to but fail, and after that get up and then do something else. There's no such thing as at the end of one bed.
Thank you so much. Right, so now maybe we'll transition to the Q&A session. First, from our participants physically, do any of you have any questions? Yes.
Do I say it in the mic? Okay.
I guess we can turn back time a little to our discussion at the start about, I guess, building the networks that you want to build within the, I guess, like people that you can contact with or other, I guess, tangential industries that we might be exposed to. We talk a lot about like taking in like things from the US and trying to build stuff at home. But I think you also talked about the idea of like letting the US understand what Malaysia has to offer. And the same goes on an individual level. I think trying to get a seat in the tables that we want to get a seat in on campus can sometimes be challenging in terms of just, if you say you're Malaysian, there's the soft power aspect of like our food is great. But I guess my question would be like, how do you transition from the soft power aspect to like building your academic or intellectual ability, or like, I guess proving that you have that ability in those seats? Because I think competitively, other nations or other people, other international students who are coming in are also vying for those seats.
Thank you.
Okay. Your question around basically how do we bring ourselves to the table, right? So again, very, very quickly, when I was 4 out of 3,000, I didn't know how to explain to people who were still thinking about it. So I basically did what my mom told me. Tell people what you like about your country. And for me, it was about food. Right? Because again, you can't tell people about beaches because they'll start comparing it to other beaches. Right? Everybody will say, oh, mine's better than that. But I learned one very simple thing. So again, I was in a dorm, only Malaysian in a dorm full of Caucasians, Black Americans and everything. And I realized that actually I wanted to introduce them to something simple because I like my nasi lemak, but I like my bergedil even more. So I did, what are some things that you can do as a male who doesn't know how to cook? You tell your mother, teach me 2 things that I can basically not suffer through. So she taught me how to make a bergedil. You guys know what bergedil is, right? Now, it's basically a patty that basically looks like a meatball that, whatever it is. Now, I made that, and basically when I was cooking, I had friends interested to see what that was. And eventually, I started having a conversation about my culture, which got people to then start understanding a little bit more around why it was that way. So people got interested. The reason why I'm using that is because there's nothing wrong with using soft power to be able to do this, because again, as a small country, it's about the uniqueness that you bring. You can't say, okay, you know what, we're a service country, or our biggest export is basically E&E. We want to talk about semiconductors. Sometimes I just go, huh? It's what's unique about you, right? So when I still do it till today, and the reason I was telling some of you about the forums that we take, sometimes when you tell people I'm from Khazanah, I like you to basically take a 24, 25-hour flight and attend basically a 2-day conference where we're not going to pay you potentially. Interested? Anybody interested? Just take a 21-hour flight just to attend 2 days without getting paid? No, right? But when we tell them about the country, we tell them about basically our purpose, we show them some of the beauties, and we basically tell them, you come here, we'll basically show you a little bit more about the culture and get you to also interact with people from the academia, from the sciences, from the government and private sector, and you have an opportunity to contribute. That's where the hook comes in, right? So again, coming back to, I guess, where you are right now, it's about what you feel people would be most interested to learn about you and where you're from, right? Now, again, I use food because, I'm not as smart as you guys. I can't tell them about, some magic formula that you guys came up with in school, which I have no idea to do. But it's one of those things where sometimes you have to realize socialized power in a country standpoint is actually very real, because you can go from people 20, 30 years ago not knowing your country to actually saying, oh, KLCC, Twin Towers. You ask anybody about Malaysia right now, most likely they'll tell you about the Twin Towers. That's something. That means we've reached that, the elements about that, and then they will acknowledge. That's a lot different again and again. If you ask people to say Malaysia, what will be the first thing anybody does is they basically start checking on the internet about what it is, right? So the curiosity is, you need to help build that curiosity, right? Because to your point, everybody knows Japan, everybody knows China, everybody knows India, because basically the largest economies are around there. So it takes a little bit more unique. So I always call it guerrilla warfare, right? Be a bit more sneaky, be a little bit more inventive about who you are. Because basically they said, so what's the race? You say, you know what, we are Muhibah, right? Then you'll say the Malay, Chinese, Indian, and everything. And where else can you get a country that basically is very open about some of these things? It's, again, as I said, it's a bit of a hook, and it doesn't mean that you have to position the country economically in order to get interest. Because sometimes when people understand your culture, they like it, that's when they start understanding some of the similarities. We do that even in Khazanah. Again, when you come to Khazanah, or if you're somebody who's investing in Khazanah, the first thing we do is we take you to eat. It's a very interesting way of just introducing people to the culture of who we are, and then we talk about the investments. That's basically our secret weapon, right? The fact that as a culture, we know how to not entertain, but we know as a culture how to welcome people into the countries and the culture. Right? Use that, right? Because I think that's something that sometimes we underestimate. And when you say soft, I say basically that's the strongest thing that. Right? When you have an opinion about that? Oh, sorry, not this one.
I just wanted to comment. It's quite interesting that of that perspective, because perhaps I'm in my own bubble. I work a lot with the finance industry and entrepreneurial stakeholders, and they actually see Malaysia as a source of excitement and opportunity. I think the reason why is, especially with stakeholders in finance, when I say finance, I mean institutional investors, family offices, venture capital funds, private equity, and whatnot. Arguably for them, when they look at China, Singapore, Switzerland, US, London, or whatnot, they see that these markets are already developed, and it's hard to earn a return in these markets because the markets are lower. When you're in an emerging market or you're in a country like Malaysia, the return can be tenfold or even 200x fold. And especially in the world of green financing right now, Malaysia is extremely popular because Malaysia is very friendly towards green financing. So we see a lot of investors flocking to Malaysia, and they're seeing, I think I mentioned to one of your colleagues that they're seeing 200x on some of their investment already. That is amazing, and that's really good for Malaysia. And so I think it's perhaps a matter of perspective and perhaps a narrative, because arguably some people may look up to finance, and in a way, Malaysia, you could perhaps narrate this story as it's a country of a lot of opportunity, because there is a lot of opportunity. There's an untapped market there. The country has a large population, that there's a lot of products and services that can be extended to Malaysians. But there needs to be more entrepreneurs, or there needs to be more investment. So I guess in a way, a short story on my side is I guess it's the narrative, because for me, I'm very excited about Malaysia.
Yeah, part of my work is meeting with people, meeting with potential investors. We particularly like that because we need that they are interested in Malaysia. They're not yet in Malaysia, they are interested in Malaysia. So, and our work here is mostly like opening and facilitating and paving ways into Malaysia. That is what our work is at the concept. We have MIDA, Malaysian Investment Development Agency, that I go to San Francisco frequently. And that's why how I met you guys. And then we have these investors who are already investing in Malaysia, but particularly like meeting with people, investors who are thinking of going to Malaysia. That's the push factor. That's why we want to go and see them. And then I do agree, like the soft skills, like the when you inject certain cultural aspects of it, it gives you more edge, leverage. We were talking about food. And I remember like we like to meet with our potential investors. We like to expose them beforehand on our culture, on what can be expected. And one of the ways that we agree is that we meet over lunch, and then we would meet over macam on the people like Malaysian restaurants if possible, so that it gives them that first impression that Malaysia welcomes them, that this is going to be a very exciting time for them. So yeah, I do agree that Malaysia has a lot of things to offer. It's an emerging market. Like if you have already markets that's already saturated, then there's nothing much that you can do. But if you have an emerging market and the one that offers more opportunity, that welcomes you and will do more, give you more, then the companies, the potential investors will be very much interested. And when you infuse on these soft skills, this makan or whatsoever, then it gives you the more edge, I think, an opportunity for them.
Thank you so much. Right. Are there any more questions physically? Yes. We'll take one more question physically, then we'll go to the Zoom.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kim. I'm a student from UCSD. So for a bit of context, recently in UCSD, USC, and Cal, there's this emergence of a startup company or app called Ditto AI, right? Which is basically, to sum it up, it's a dating app that utilizes AI to match two potential partners together. Now, I personally had the opportunity to work a bit with Ditto AI to create the website or whatever. But there comes a concern with me. It's sort of like a moral obligations where we understand that the use of AI causes excessive water usage to cool down the servers, to run all of the computation and everything. My moral obligation is telling me that although the connection is memang so worth it, I get connected with people from USC, Stanford, Cal, and everything. But on the other hand, I'm like, hey, this is gonna ruin a lot of the environment. This is gonna, cause rivers to be polluted. This is gonna cause people to lose homes and everything. So I'm like, on one hand, I'm like, is it worth it for me to get all of these opportunities in connection, but people will lose other opportunities and their livelihood? Where do I draw that line? You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's my question. You guys can answer it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Would anyone like to go first? Maybe a variation there.
Thank you for this question. It's actually a topic that I'm actually addressing in my work at the moment, actually. First and foremost, when there are challenges like this, there are actually opportunities because, 10, 20 years ago, it was about computers. Like, how do we navigate? It's like, we can't ignore it. It's going to happen. It's like, how do we address it and making sure that it's safe for everyone, the internet is safe for everyone, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, what I've seen a lot of, speaking of entrepreneurs, because this type of work requires a lot of critical thinking and careful analysis and testing to see what works. And so there have been some entrepreneurs that we've been working with that have tested out how to make sure that servers can operate and meet the demand, but also not have lower environmental impact. And so recently, I think a couple months ago, I visited Switzerland, where they have these servers in very, very cold, I was very cold, areas inside the mountains. So they had underground servers, and they really did not need any type of heating. So, and then some of the other facilities I visited in the US and in China and Norway, I'm not sure if you're aware, but they're actually building a lot of servers in the Arctic underneath the ocean because it keeps the costs down. So there's a lot more innovation in this light, and there's a lot of testing in this regard. But it's not so much. Even though it's a challenge at the moment, it doesn't mean that it can't be solved. And perhaps if you're interested, it's something that could help solve this issue as well, because AI is not going away. So it's something that we have to look into.
Oh, okay.
Again, for every challenge that comes in, there's always somebody working on the opportunity, right? Again, we talked about some of these things. What's interesting to probably hear about the conversation here is that the long-term solution building in colder areas, or will there be technology that allows for basically competing to be done with lesser environmental impact? Right? I think that's where the question here is I guess whether or not the technology and the sustainable aspects around it are going to work hand in hand. Again, to the point that was raised, AI is not going to go away. So I think the question here is what are the complementary technologies that now have to be built to be able to help that out? Because again, you're right. The data farms that coming up and everything that's there, it's increasing a lot more, and it's got that implications. But again, I'm happy to hear that there are a lot of people who are now starting to look at it. It'll just be interesting to see or not, somebody, or at least when I was hearing about the Arctic or what is being built, is whether or not somebody will say, oh, wouldn't that expedite basically then the global warming, because that's basically now going to be there. Technology will at least at some point catch up. It's just that I suppose then the question here is who's going to help with building that technology? And I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but I guess that's where some of you guys probably will probably help build the next solution to that.
Well, I don't have the answer to that. But I was very encouraged to hear that you are very much concerned about the different aspects of your ambition. And so I was listening and I was like, oh, wow, I never thought of it. And I really appreciate your concern. But as I mentioned that maybe you can work together, you're focusing in product A and what would be the consequences, repercussions for the environment, but then you can work together with another company that could address that part for you or with you. So, and then there's just so many ways, there's so many organizations, NGOs that you can work together with. So that's it.
Right, thank you so much. Right, maybe perhaps moving to questions from virtual participants. Okay, yes, I think you're right. Okay, the first question is, would a neutral arms-length diplomacy be the best approach for Malaysia economically, given the tensions between the West and China in the past decade? Would anyone like to go first?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Very specific. That's right.
I don't know. Do you want to start with me? Because he's asking economically. Okay, on the diplomacy perspective. Okay, I think Malaysia do not see that as a very major issue. We see that because our policy is that we are friends to everyone, right? We are friends to China, but we are also friends to the US. And in policies such as that, we tend to be neutral because of our focus is much more on the economic perspective. Really, this is a very difficult question. But yeah, on the foreign affairs, we are neutral. And actually, our foreign policy is an extension to our domestic priorities, in the sense that we are looking at the economic values or what it brings to the country. On the more economic perspective, I leave it to our expert here.
Well, I think I said this when we started off. I think that was one of the things, right? We have many trading partners in multiple different countries. It basically talks to the fact that because we are neutral as a philosophy, it makes us basically then very good trading partners because we focus on what's there. And I think that's one of the things that we leverage on, given the size of the country and the kind of things that we want to do. And to echo Pon's talked about, it's a delicate environment if you look at it from a larger standpoint. But I think if you look at the relationships, again, because we're hosting ASEAN Business Summits, you have the presidents of Russia coming in, you have the US president coming in, and hopefully the Chinese president will come in, which gives you an indication that they do look at us as an organization that can pull that off. Right? So I think being quote unquote neutral has its advantages in being able to kind of like position us as a intermediary in a lot of different things.
I just have a short response, and I'm looking at it from a more of a macro historical perspective. Of course, when we look at history, that taking a neutral stance has its pros and cons. We've seen a lot of countries being able to develop and succeed in taking a neutral stance, but we've also seen that in times of tension or dynamic discourse, that taking a stance could also have its benefits. But from a UN perspective, what is valued most is that what do the people want? What do Malaysians want? And let that guide them from there. Because if you go from that perspective, there's more sustainability in any initiatives because there's pros and cons to each way.
Right. Now maybe we are moving towards the penultimate question, but I guarantee you that the last question will be a bit more lighthearted. But right, our penultimate question. This comes virtually from one of our participants who is an aspiring engineer. They ask, given the efforts of implementing CCUS, carbon capture utilization storage in Malaysia, what is the future of renewable energy in our nation? Would anyone like to go first? Okay.
You know, at the UN Global Compact, climate is a big issue that we are working on, a big challenge that we are working on. And at the moment, I'm very happy to see that there's a lot of revolutionary innovation and topics on items, products, and services that address the climate challenge that we're facing. Speaking of carbon capture, there is a lot of growth in carbon credits. And although that's something that's very exciting to see, that doesn't preclude and shouldn't preclude that emissions still need to be cut. Because in a way, for those that may not be aware of carbon credit, it's a system where perhaps stakeholder A, X, Y, Z still maintains their operations as it is, but they buy credits, and that credit could be from NGO, another private sector, where they perhaps plant trees or they help lower emissions. But so from the UN's perspective, emissions still being emitted. So I'm very excited, and we are very excited to see all this new technology being carbon capturing. The challenge that we're seeing is a lot of money is being poured in, and this is why this is very good for Malaysia, because Malaysia is at the forefront of this. But at the same time, how do we make this cheaper? It's still very expensive, and we need to be testing out. And you guys are very, very bright people. I can imagine getting all these minds together to come up with ways of how to make it cheaper, how to make it more accessible, not just at an individual level, household level, but at a national level. That's a challenge that everyone we are facing, the whole world is facing right now. So I would encourage everyone right now that this is, if you're looking for opportunities and, potentially financially lucrative positions, that this is very, very hot right now because the climate issues are not going away. It needs to be addressed. And there's a lot more money pouring in, but there needs to be a lot of more work on making this more stable and scalable. So I'm very excited to see the developments.
I guess from a Khazanah standpoint, there's a lot of investments that we have talked about from the sustainability environment. So you think about it, a lot of investments that we basically partake in will already have the sustainability goals inbuilt inside it. So it's one of those things to be able to talk about something like carbon capture as one of those elements of the strategy at a, I guess, national level. It's all, I think it's more a private and public kind of like a collaboration that you see a lot of. Petronas has taken quite a lot, if you probably understand what the president has declared in terms of, its own commitments on sustainability. If you go to the website of Khazanah, basically we've got an entire arm that's basically devoted around managing our carbon footprints and whatnot. So I guess if you're asking from that standpoint, there is still a lot of things to do, but there is, I think, quite a lot of progress that has been made from where we were maybe about 3 or 5 years ago. It is one of those things that has constant challenges, especially given the state of investment on sustainability over the last 12 months and some of the U-turns that have been made. But so far as the direction that has been given to at least the state-owned enterprises, or at least the GLICs in Malaysia, as well as the GLCs, it's still moving forward to be able to make sure that it's reducing the carbon footprints.
I'll give a very general government perspective of this. Climate change is an issue that the government is seriously looking at. And then there are many national map or national blueprint addressing climate change. We have this, if I'm not mistaken, there was this climate change blueprint that was launched last year or earlier this year. So the government is seriously looking at this as well, and there are many, even states that are seriously addressing this. For example, Sarawak is one of the states that now making hydrogen as a priority, and they want to be the regional renewable energy powerhouse. So there are efforts, of course, there are initiatives that is addressing to this climate change issue. But as mentioned, that it needs time as well. But it is progressing in Malaysia.
Right, thank you. So now our final question. In 1 minute or less, if you had a time machine and you could go back to when you were 20, what is one thing that you would tell your 20-year-old self? And what's one thing that you would do differently? Maybe we'll start with Madam CG.
At the age of 20 or 20s?
20s.
Okay. I would say, oh, can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. What's one thing that you would tell your, let's say, 20-year-old or your version of yourself when you were in your 20s? And what's one piece of advice you'd tell to them? And also, the second thing is, what's one thing that you would do differently?
Okay. All right. In the early 20s, I was a student here in US. One thing that I would say to myself is to have more fun. Because I was a sponsored student, I was very concerned about, getting an excellent grade so that I don't have to pay. I was a Mara student, so I have to, always like, oh, you gotta get straight A's, because you don't want one, your sponsorship, nagtarik balik and all that. And I was at Tulane University, New Orleans, Mardi Gras, right? But I was very much focused in my studies, and I also worked part-time at the university. So hence the advice as, try to absorb the culture and all that, because I was very much focused in my academic. So one thing that would change is that, I would have more fun in the US. And because I really believe that it would add more value, not only to my career after that, but also to my life, the value of my life and all that. So that I would change. And that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sure. So, yeah. I think to build upon that, two things. If I were to tell myself, I would say not to be scared of failure or risk. I think when you're very young, you're scared. You want to please your parents, you want to please your community, your people. That when I look back and see my own classmates or my colleagues, that the ones that took risks, they are at a very good point in their lives right now because they were willing to try new things and be ambitious. And the second thing is, I also want to also echo having fun. Not in the sense to have fun, but I don't know any industry that doesn't rely on people relations and the network. And how do you go to network? You truly, make friends. You're more willing to help out a friend than someone that contacts you on LinkedIn. So sorry, I know I'm saying much about LinkedIn today, but I truly believe that. And I think that if I was to a younger self, I would tell my, because, coming from an Asian background, like, oh, you need to focus on your studies, but in the real world, it's about relationships and people to move the needle forward. So nowadays, I see the people that did have fun. Yes, still get your good grades, please, but it's also important to build that, relationships and friendships because they'll carry it with you the rest of the life.
Sorry, I wanted to be the last because it was that far back. If I had anything to tell my 20-something-year-old self is buy Yahoo stocks. At that point in time, right? Yeah. Oh, there was a Bitcoin at the time. There was no such thing as a Bitcoin. It only started happening in the 21st century. But I'll be quite honest, I don't think I would have done anything different. I did have quite a lot of fun. I did have a very balanced life. Grades were still okay. If anything, I probably wanted to be able to do is just kind of like, again, be a bit more open to experiences. There were some of those things where we say, hey, let's go and do it, it'll be fun. And you're like, right? I mean, I'm not to say that I do that, but I think in this day and age where everyone's concerned about mental well-being, I think you also have to kind of like give yourself a bit of a chance to kind of like experience life the way you're meant to be, right? Chill, right? Don't get so stressed and then say, it's affecting me. You guys, if you want to understand when some of us were growing up last time, right? When people say, it's tough, people will say, suck it up, get on with it, right? That's the kind of things that I suppose if I wanted to tell any of you to do it is because you will have challenges, but just go through it. You'll be a lot better, right? And that's one of the things that I probably should have told my 20-year-old self, but I was a little bit more. My father told me one thing I remember until today: study hard, don't get into trouble, don't embarrass the family. That's the three things until today. And I say that to my daughters. One just graduated and one more is about to start, right? And here's the same thing for you all, because you carry yourself into whatever it is. And don't worry, your career will build itself. It's all going to be based on what you're interested in, and you'll hit an equilibrium around what you'll be able to do. Just don't want to go and just give yourself time to do it. As someone doing HR, sometimes when I talk to somebody, in 5 years, I want to be this. And after that, I want to do that. It's just like somebody wants to do a startup and become a billionaire before they're 30. It's like, okay, great to have ambition. May not happen so much, but doesn't mean that you don't do that, right? So for those of you who are about to enter the workforce and all of that, again, as what we're saying, enjoy being a student. You're away from your parents. There's a reason for that. It's because you can be independent. not because of anything else, and for you to establish yourself as individuals. Yeah, that's the one thing that I guess I want to say you. And like I said, I wouldn't, other than the fact that buy more shares in Yahoo, didn't necessarily have any regret before. Thanks.
Thank you so much to all our three panelists. I think it's been a truly wonderful session. Right, so I think it's come to a close. Once again, thank you so much to all our participants as well, both physical and virtual, and I'll pass it back to the MC.
All right, thank you to our panelists. That was a great discussion. There was a lot to unpack. Before we break away, I'd like to invite everyone over to the front for a group photo session.
Yes.